Hello, I'm Brett Knowles from PM2 Consulting. This is the much anticipated YouTube where I'm beginning to drill into the detail on how we build the employee scorecard. As a quick reminder, this is based on the scorecard work that we've completed over the last 20 or 30 years across a broad spectrum of organizations and from around the world. As a brief reminder of our previous YouTubes, there basically are three major components where we need to measure and monitor and manage employee performance within the organization. Within the organization, they both run the organization and improve the organization. Two areas. In development or human capital, they both develop themselves and they develop their co-workers. And then finally in feedback, we get feedback internally and externally. And within each of these, we can earn points based on the relative performance in each of those areas. And part of the trick is providing the employee with quick feedback so that they can, on a month-to-month basis, monitor and manage their time to be better in line with strategic objectives. So that's the executive summary. Let's talk about how that gets done. So for this example, a public transportation commission, we built a strategy map which outlines the strategic objectives, their cause and effect relationship, and their relative importance for this year. The weighting across all objectives adds up to 100%. And the red, yellow, green in this case come from their scorecard where they're reporting the monthly performance. Now here's the thing. Strategy informs what we should be doing in the organization. For example, if you had a strategy that says we should penetrate new markets, then processes related to penetrating new markets inherently have better value or more strategic importance. So if we listed the strategic objectives down the left side of a spreadsheet and across the top your core processes, we should be able to begin to analyze how processes support the strategic objectives. Let's drill into this so we can see it in a bit more detail. So if we take a process like customer service and a strategic objective like deliver value for money, in theory, we should be able to understand the relationship both of what is the impact of customer service on our ability to achieve deliver value for money, and secondly, how we're currently performing with our current processes and capabilities. So in this case, let's say we have an impact of 5 out of 5. So customer service has a high impact in delivering value for money, and they're performing at 4 out of 5. And the relationship between the weighting, impact, and performance, in this case, gives us a green performance. Now this is based on a fairly complicated spreadsheet, but you can understand the mathematics. Let's take a look at customer service's impact on managed costs. Same score. Impact of 5, performance of 4, but now it's a yellow. Why is that? Because although performance of 4 on an objective of a weighting of 5 is good enough, that same performance is not good enough when it becomes more important. It's akin to having, a low grade score at school on an important subject like mathematics and a similarly low score on some subject that might be less important to you, like, art, gym, geography, whatever it might be. Now, a third example would be down here, with a weighting of 20, the same performance, 5 and 4, is red, because I have to be perfect performance on my most important objective. So we can continue this scoring process across all the strategic objectives. That can begin to give us a score of how we're performing. And in fact, if we go back and look across all the processes, we get a better view of the overall organization performance. In fact, we can add up the scores by strategic objective and produce a graph that looks like this. In this case, the blue bar, the total height of the bar represents how much process support we need for success strategically for that objective. The blue portion represents how well we're currently performing. So that's, adding up the greens plus the good part of the yellows. And then the gold part here is the gap between how we're currently performing and what the strategy calls for. Now, we could also add it up by column to give you a chart like this. This shows me how well we're performing by process. So in this case, operations has, strategy and service planning has the biggest strategic gap, followed up by operations. Okay, that sets the stage for how we can now begin to build an employee scorecard. So, going back to the first part, run the business. What we should be able to do is take an example. So let's say you're involved with the customer service process. So in this case, if we take a look at the strategy points earned, again, that's multiplying the impact by the weighting, and then looking at the current performance level, there are about 1,450 strategy points available if you own this process and ran it for the year. So now we need to begin looking at what your role is. So perhaps in this particular organization, they're using a RACI model, and you have the R. You're responsible for this process. And therefore, the allocation is, if the process runs well, you can earn up to 600 of these points for performing. Now, let's say, for example, this particular month you achieved 90% of the target. 90% of 600 is 514. So now we can begin building your employee scorecard. Now you've earned 514 points, and maybe that's enough to give you a top performer award for this month. So again, what we've done is we've taken the strategy, we've decomposed it down to the process, then based on your role in the process and the actual performance, give you performance points for running the business. Now, remember, the gold bar is the gap. So if we take a look at improving the business, we're trying to make that silver bar here disappear. So let's say in that case, you're involved with the customer service improvement project. In that case, there's about 550 points available for improving that process based on the current strategy. And again, if the strategy changed, if we put a higher focus, it's possible that weighting, the number of points would increase, or if we decide we're not going to be customer-centric, it could decrease. So, let's say in that case, you're the project leader. And based on the allocation, there's 250 points of the 550 that you could earn for bringing this project in on time, on budget, and on quality. And we can measure that based on milestones and evaluations month to month. But eventually, let's say midpoint, you're on time, on budget, on quality. So you've earned 250 points, and that gives you a Zone 1 award. So that answers a question of how it is we deal with the on-the-business activities of running and improving. Now, let's move on to the second part, the human capital. So human capital, we have the choice of developing yourself, your own human capital, and developing others. First, we're going to take a look at yourself. So let's say when you do your annual performance plan, we've identified what you'd like to be, where your career is taking you, and so forth, and therefore what the development you require for your next career movement. And in this example, you've been able to complete your training. In fact, you've received some form of certification. So again, on your scorecard, we can give you points for having completed the training program and recognition that you have that certification. So that's training yourself. Now, the other issue, though, is training others. You know a bunch of stuff based on your career and your experiences and so forth. We need the rest of the organization to learn that stuff as well. So you committed to being a mentor or a coach during this period. And for the sake of argument, let's pretend for some reason you've been unable to meet that commitment. You haven't spent the time with your coworkers that you planned. Now, you still earned 100 points, but that was below target. So that icon is now yellow. You're slightly behind target, and that's going to give you an indication that perhaps you should find the time next period to refocus. Now, we've also talking about maybe a corporate goal of contributing to our community or something, and you've been leading the local Girl Guide group, and so therefore you've exhibited the corporate value of contributing to our communities, 100 points, and so forth. Now, the second part is feedback. Or the third part, rather, is feedback. So internal feedback. So in this case, perhaps you've done a 360 or you've gone through a peer review. And in that case, you've done well your coworker assessment gives you 450 points and an award for having completed that peer review. Then finally, external. External is a bit softer because we don't have necessarily the structured quality of the feedback, but maybe you did a public seminar on the products and some of the participants used the mobile app to give you a score for your presentation. And again, you've earned, in this case, 470 customer feedback points. So the idea, and perhaps based on that, you've got the Good Partner Award. So what we've been able to do is produce a series of scorecards and reports based on your performance day to day across those core activities, linked back to strategy, and giving you feedback on a monthly basis. So this is going to allow you to begin to manage yourself and help the organization manage you. Here are some examples. Perhaps by taking a look at this combination of badges, the organization should be able to say, based on your interest in what you've done, here are 2 or 3 other things you should do that would give you a project management certification or facilitator mentor certification. So it can make recommendations about career paths and development. It also allows us to begin finding mentors for you. Here's someone who's gone the same path as you a year or 2 before. Would you like them as a mentor or a coach to guide you in your career? The third opportunity here is if you wanted to create a new team to deal with a new issue, I should be able to use this instrument to begin determining who should be on that team based on their capabilities and so forth to date. This way we keep challenging the employees and the organization gets to harvest the best requirements needed to achieve certain objectives. So that's a quick flyby of the process to develop these employee scorecards. If you'd like to know more, please go to pm2consulting.com. There's a whole bunch, 2,000 or 3,000 webinars out there where I describe these processes in more detail. I hope this has been useful to you.